What role can Christians play in our increasingly fractured and polarized and bitterly divided cultural moment? Well, lots of people have different thoughts on that. Jake Meador certainly has some in his new book, What Are Christians For? Let me tell you what I thought.
Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz.
All right, I have here the new book from InterVarsity Press and Jake Meador. I think I'm saying his last name right. What Are Christians For? I'm going to follow my typical framework of main idea, the research behind it, the readability of it, and the reasonableness of the argument. But first, let me say that I appreciate Jake's voice and his writing voice specifically. I did read his first book, In Search of the Common Good, and I appreciated it. I also generally have appreciated what I've seen come out of Mere Orthodoxy, a website that he's in leadership of, editor-in-chief, I believe. So I went into this primed to probably at very least appreciate his thoughtfulness and kind of his posture with writing. But I was very curious to see what specific angle he would take on this question about kind of Christian witness and Christian political engagement in our time. And so the main idea of his book, really this is a book that is so this is the main idea section of my review. This book is within that subcategory of Christian books that are reckoning with modernity. All the implications of secular, late modern, capitalistic, whatever words you want to use. They're reckoning with the kind of the modern advance. Things like the Industrial Revolution, the Sexual Revolution, race, colonialism, post-slavery, post-Jim Crow, and then civil rights, all of those topics. So gender, race, economics, the things that modernity has wrought in all of those topics. What are the implications of that, where we stand today, and how do we thoughtfully engage the implications of all of those changes in society, and what's a robust kind of Christian answer to those things? How importantly, and this is what Jake is getting at in this book, how should Christians live? What should things like Christian discipleship look like in these times? And so this is a book that, there's lots of books, I'll say more about this at the end, but there's a lot of books that propose responses to these questions today. A lot of stuff is being written about this today, and this is another example. So that's the main idea. What are Christians for? How do Christians live in this time? How do we kind of reset our vision of the Christian life and Christian witness in this time? So the research behind it, what he pulls on, he's first of all, extremely just thoughtful person, well-read person, very clearly. And he pulls on a pretty wide variety of sources. Particularly, he pulls on Mere Orthodoxy. If you're familiar with that website, it's pretty. I would say it's generally pretty reformed, and it's, if you know what that theological category is. So he does pull on reformers and reformed theologians, particularly Martin Bucer. He pulls on Martin Bucer quite a bit amongst the kind of so-called great reformers. He's figures prominently in this book, but also Herman Bavinck. Is on stuff on worldview, kind of a little bit more in the Kuyperian strand, again, if you know what these terms mean. But I'm saying that to also say that Jake pulls on, I'm using his first name instead of his last name because I'm not sure I'm saying it right, but he also pulls on Catholic theology quite a bit. Multiple popes, writings of multiple popes he uses, and that's not surprising because he does some work with natural theology, and Catholic thinking has a lot more of a rich, robust history with natural theology than a lot of Protestant theology does, sadly, interestingly. So he pulls a lot on Catholic theology, and then also one name in particular that he uses quite a bit is a modern theologian is Willie James Jennings, whose wonderful book, you actually see it, that yellow book right behind me is his book, The Christian Imagination. So What Are Christians For? Uses Willie Jennings' work, and also some of his other work and some of his other writings, quite a bit. He engages with it very, very well. And so those are some of the sources, but there's others too that are mixed in there, but very, very well sourced argument and well documented in terms of where these ideas come from. It's very easy to chase down sources that he uses. So that's a bit on the research. The readability. I think the readability is the strongest aspect of this book. I'm not going to say too much about it. It's pretty short. When I held it up, you could probably tell it was pretty small in terms of page count. It's short chapters, super, super readable. He's a very, very easy to read writer. My suspicion is that a lot of his writing of columns and internet articles and short form writing, I think, has primed him to be a very efficient writer. And so this book is super easy to read. Very, very easy to also not only just enjoyable stylistically, but easy to trace his line of thought. And he interacts with some big philosophical and cultural theory and historical subjects, distills them and summarizes them in ways that are very easy to follow, even if you're uninitiated to the thinkers that he's interacting with. So not much more to say about that. Super readable, and I could easily give this to anybody in my community. I think that, and even if they're not a big reader, they would probably enjoy it and get something out of it. So very approachable. Okay, finally, the reasonableness, my overall reaction to this argument. So I'm going to try to summarize a few of my thoughts quickly on that. I really appreciated this book. I'm just going to say that out the front. I really appreciated it. It stimulated some serious thought and reflection on my part. And I have done, and I'm starting there because I've done quite a bit of reading in the general subject area in which he is dialoguing with. So things like modernity. I've read a lot on the impact of modernity, the changes of modernity, the implications of the Industrial Revolution, the Sexual Revolution, just all of that stuff. I've done a lot of reading on race, the major topics he engages with. And that, even though I have done a lot of that reading, and even though this is a very short book, a very approachable book, he still said some new interesting things for me to think about. So that's significant. He brings something to the conversation. And that's one thing that I think is important to know about this book, even though there are a ton of books along this general category being put out right now. This does, I think, have a few new things to say. And one way in which it's really helpful, in particular, to build on that a little bit, is to say that he is building out a big argument. He's layering an argument. And so he does not simply, there are huge fat academic books on any one topic that he addresses. There's tons of work on the Industrial Revolution. How did the Industrial Revolution remake things like the subject of work and labor, and also the way the household functioned, and also the way gender functions? There's tons of ink spilled on that subject alone, but that's just one layer of this argument that he's spinning out in this pretty small book. And so one thing he does well, I would say, is he layers this argument well together. He summarizes big swaths of thought in short chapters and then links each layer. So then after talking about the Industrial Revolution and connecting that to things like gender, he also talks about colonialism and connects that to things like race. And he kind of nests this all under a broader idea of how modernity has kind of uprooted us from our context, from who we are in connection to the land, for example, which is, if you know Willie Jennings' work, you'll know some points of resonance there already. But he nests it all within a broader argument about modernity and the effect of modernity in our mindset towards other people and towards the land and towards the earth and, of course, towards God. And then he layers in more specific arguments about gender, about the household, about race, about sexuality, and about work and about industrialism. And so what I'm trying to say, what I'm kind of meandering around, is I'm trying to say he pulls together a lot of threads in a short chapter a short argument in short chapters that are very accessible, and I would say he layers them together very, very well, very effectively. Now, the flip side of that is that they are short chapters, and there is a lot more to say about each subject he gets into than what he says in this short argument. So take that for what it's worth. I think for what he's trying to do, I think it's very, very thoughtful. It's also a very winsome argument in terms of it's not hyper polemical at all. It's not culture war at all. It's not bashing, scary, mean, secular culture at all. Not at all. It's a very confident, poised, I would say positive posture towards all these subjects. So I always find that extraordinarily refreshing in Christian publishing. And so that's some of my general reactions. I do want to say one more thing about the book on one of its I'm guessing is going to be one of its more provocative aspects. And that is he builds towards a certain argument about same-sex unions and same-sex marriages and even legislation about marriage in a culture like America. And it's near the end of the book, and it's one aspect of the book that I'm bringing up here because I'm suspecting it's going to be, if it's not already, I haven't looked into many reviews of this book, but I'm suspecting it's going to be one of the more lightning rod provocative aspects of the book. And I wanted to say that I'm not sure what I think about his argument on that particular piece, so I'm not going to give you, because I'm not sure where I land on it. However, I think he articulates himself very clearly, and I can very clearly follow his line of thought and why he got to where he gets to in that particular argument. And it's one of the pieces of argumentation in this book that I am really thinking through the most. And it's giving me the most food for thought, honestly. But I also think it's going to be one of the more controversial. So I'm avoiding saying particulars because I would honestly encourage people to read the book itself. Let the argument speak for itself and then wrestle with it in that way. But I wanted to point it out as an aspect of the book that I think is going to stand out in terms of people's reactions to it. But I think it was very thoughtfully done. And I really, really appreciate the way. And also, the last thing I want to say about that is that it's one piece of a much bigger nested argument. It's nested within lots of other arguments about what role does the family play in society, what role does gender play within the family, what role does work play in the household, and how has all of this been messed up by things like industrialization. So anyways, those are some of my thoughts on it. I found it, so in terms of my categories of reasonableness, it's a very reasonable argument, extraordinarily reasonable argument, even if some of the bits and pieces are still, I'm not sure where exactly I land on some of the details, but I think the argument as such is very, very reasonable and very, very clear, very well written, very well researched, and presented in a remarkably small package, like easy to digest and read and think through package. So those are my thoughts on the book What Are Christians For? From InterVarsity and from Jake Meador. Really appreciate it. I'm going to be returning to aspects of it as I engage with some of these other topics in other readings, and he's pointing me towards some resources that I think I'm going to chase down and do some deeper reading on as well. So there you go. Hopefully that gives you a sense of whether or not this is a book that is worth your time, or a book that you might resonate with, or even give you some provocative food for thought. I think all those things are possible. So as always, thank you for taking some time to watch, and I hope that you found something interesting, stimulating, and maybe even provocative here on this channel. Thanks.